And so then on top of all my research, then I kind of had to come up obviously with characters and a storyline, and I came up with this Brandon Vanderkool as my front and center character, and he's a border patrol agent on the southern side, as those of you who have read it know, and he just kind of struck me as the unusual character for this unusual story in these unusual times. And he's 6'8", highly dyslexic, does strange art in the woods, and seems to be the best weapon the U.S. has against smugglers and illegals from coming into the country. And so I wanted to read a couple sections with Brandon, and then I wanted to read the section that actually set in White Rock here a minute after that. Okay, so this is Brandon. He's been trained and he's out on patrols, and this is his first time of actually being out on his own, trying to be a real live border patrol agent. 780 to 205. 205 copy, Brandon murmured once he got over being startled. Sensor at Markworth, copy, he said, be there shortly. He sped along Garrison, then Badger, and finally H Street, hurtling west out of the valley into the hilly woodlands, driving faster than he figured was safe. Once on Markworth, he parked quietly, then loped across a clearing toward the woods and the trail sensor, the wind-blown spruce groaning like settling houses. He was noticing how the exhaust of a Vancouver-bound jet split the sky when he stubbed his boot on a root, and during his fall he heard, then saw, a doe and its fawn leap over ferns like cartoon reindeer. He rose, brushing dirt and needles from his thighs and chest, before noticing his gun planted cockeyed in the dirt, the barrel pointed at his chest as if the earth itself was holding him at gunpoint. He'd barely passed the range test. His shots usually flew high, as though he thought he had to arc the bullets. He picked up the Beretta and waited for his breath to stabilize before calling it in with his best murmur. 780, this is 205. Go ahead, 205. At least 2 deer down here. 10-4, I'll mark it down as animal. Brandon followed boot tracks into a mossy meadow with surprisingly powdery dirt, which was where he saw the first large raindrop splat. More big drops splashed his hair and nose before he glanced up and studied the dirt again for the smoothest, driest patch, and carefully sat down, slowly reclining until his legs were spread eagle and his arms perpendicular to his trunk, as if he were strapped to an imaginary wheel, his gun extended in his left hand for artistic purposes. Rain continued falling in random splats, then in grape-sized drops, and finally in noisy ropes that silenced the birds. He let it wash his face and soak his uniform. He lay there until the rain subsided, then lurched upright, his gun arm swinging forward with the exertion, and heard gasps and curses 30 feet in front of him. Brandon yelped like a dreaming dog as his mind sorted the visuals. 3 men, 2 in their 20s, 1 in his 40s, black duffel bags strapped to their backs like scuba tanks. The younger 2, bamboo thin and pale, the older one larger and calmer with hooded eyes. Brandon glanced repeatedly at their gloved and empty hands until they began to rise, holding their palms up like hesitant students. Please, stammered one of the younger ones. Shut it, the old one mumbled, his eyes fixed on the .40 caliber gun in Brandon's big left hand, which he self-consciously dropped to his side, then said, let your hands see me. Luckily, they seemed to know what to do. Where are you coming from? Brandon asked, simultaneously trying to catch his breath and remember the sequence of what to say when and what not to say at all. Just passing through, the old one said, as convincingly as any hiker sharing a moment on a trail. What's in the bags? Brandon asked, remembering his line. Food and clothes, the man answered in a bored sing-song, though the other 2 men looked like they'd been bit by snakes.
Sorry.
Is it okay?
It's just interference from cell phones.
What can we do? Okay. Mind if I take a look? Brandon asked, sticking to the script, but increasingly feeling like he was harassing them. He wasn't sure what to say when they didn't respond or run. Lock your heads on top of your fingers, he said, worried he'd skipped a step. He unzipped the first bag and saw clear pouches of green and gold buds the size of pine cones. Brandon couldn't remember whether to read them their rights or exactly when to call for backup and didn't trust himself to get the wording right on any of it. So he said as little as possible, then frisked each one. 2 cell phones, 1 GPS, 1 ID with an Abbotsford, BC address, no weapons. He only had 2 sets of handcuffs, so he used a plastic cable tie on one of them. Too tight? You okay? When they turned to face him, he saw the old one, then the other 2, straining to see the unusual pattern in the dirt behind him. He stepped aside to give them a full view of what looked like the outline of a huge crime victim, the gray silhouette of his body surrounded by black, rain-soaked dirt. The men looked at one another. "Got buds and bodies," Brandon told the dispatcher. He directed them out of the woods, afraid he'd already screwed things up somehow. 3 heavy bags slung across his shoulders. He tried to relax by pishing for birds. When they turned around, he asked them to please keep walking and resumed pishing, psh, psh, which flushed nothing but curious chickadees from the wooded fringe. 50 yards later, however, glancing back and forth from the smugglers to the treetops, he saw the high curling swoop of a raptor. The creamy underwings looked like a red tail's, but the body was more like a rough-legged hawk, though the tail wasn't quite right. Once its wings flapped, the mystery was solved. A short-eared owl. "A short-ear!" he exclaimed, pointing at its angular glide back into the treetops. The smuggler spun and craned awkwardly to see what he was pointing at, but saw nothing at all. They glanced at one another, then back at Brandon, who dropped their bags so he could demonstrate the owl's exaggerated moth-like wing strokes, which was exactly what Agents Dion and Tally saw as they jogged around the bend toward them, flashlights and batons jostling overhead. So that's Brandon in action. And,